often said that happiness comes from within. It's a state of mind, that we're in charge of our own emotions, and that sometimes those with less are in fact happier. But according to the United Nations Happiness Report, this is not always the case. This report is set to redefine the growth of well-being around the world and bring those who are unhappy to their country's attention. Now, while most Nordic countries top the list, China is no happier today than they were 25 years ago. And Africa, with its population of around 1.2 billion people, is the unhappiest continent. Interesting. Now, to tell us a little bit more about this, from our Pretoria studios is the Communications Officer at the United Nations Information Centre, Zeenat Abdool. A very good morning to you, Zeenat, and thank you for being with us.
Good morning, Eben. Thank you very much for having me.
This is such an interesting report, and of course it's been released now for the last couple of years. Just give us the broad strokes about this report. I know you've been releasing it since 2012. What are the broad strokes of the latest reports? Firstly, I think for the African continent, and then maybe for South Africa.
All right, so I think in particular, as you've rightly mentioned, the Nordic countries have come out tops with being regarded as the world happiest, with Africa being seen as still struggling and not as happy in comparison compared to all the other countries thus far. China is no less happier than they were a few years ago as well. So I think those are some of the broad strokes that are coming out of the report, with the Nordic countries being the happiest, Africa still struggling, and the Americas actually seem to be less happier than what they once were. And those are just some of the findings thus far in a broad context.
We've got a little graphic up on the screen with the greens and reds. Just talk us over that quickly and tell us quickly how do you measure happiness in this report?
So with regards to the figure that you're seeing, or the image that you're seeing on the screen at the moment, the green countries, or the areas that are shaded in green, are the most happiest. And obviously the ones that are in red are seen as the least happiest, with many of those being in African countries. And this report was measured based on a number of issues. And one may think that these may sound very trivial in a way, but actually this is how happiness was measured in the report. And it was based on factors such as caring, freedom, generosity, honesty, health, income, and of course, most importantly, an issue that we talk about every day, and that's good governance. So, you know, if people are earning better, they seem to be happier. If there's a healthy life expectancy and access to better health care, if we have someone to count on in times of trouble, generosity, freedoms such as freedom of speech and so on, as well as trust, and of course, the absence of corruption and in business and also in government.
Let's talk about South Africa quickly before I come back and talk generally about the African continent. In South Africa, we've seen a rise, if one can call it that, in public aggression and anger. Could all of the factors that you're talking about, including the politics of the day and the kind of leadership issues that we're experiencing, and of course the rise of racism on social media and so forth, are these some of the things that are really at the heart of what bothers South Africans?
I think that would accurately define some of the factors that contribute to the anger and the unrest amongst the youth especially, and people in South Africa. And I think that also we need to look at the fact that South Africa, we come from a history of inequality, and it's going to take quite a bit of time for us to measure up or to reach the other levels of happiness as proposed by the Nordic countries. So I think that some of the issues, and yes, crime is a big issue in South Africa, as well as issues of governance and general disparities in income levels, as well as unemployment and poverty. Not everybody has the equal opportunities to access jobs. Not everyone lives in the same community as their neighbor, or in neighboring communities which have the same access to the same resources. So of course that would contribute to some of the issues that are leading to unhappiness.
Now Zeenat, here in South Africa...
And crime, of course, as I mentioned.
Yeah, in South Africa, Zeenat, we like to give pride of place to any instance of racism on social media. We put it right on all of our media platforms. Any kind of issue that divides us. The media is all over that in South Africa. Does that kind of thing, does that also drive home the unhappiness factor, if one can call it that?
Of course, racism would play a role because, I mean, the fact that we have negativity and hate towards other individuals, you know, tends to rise up people from the same community. So, for instance, we've seen some of the incidents such as the Spur incident, such as racial incident from the real estates and so real estate agent last year. We've seen the popular Penny Sparrow incident as well. And that does give rise to people feeling discontentment and they're also feeling as a lot of anger and sentiment, because while there are many of us or many South Africans that are promoting social cohesion, we also need to take into mind that, you know, there are pockets of racism or there are people that still have that mindset. And unfortunately, many people have mixed relations towards it. Some feel a huge amount of discontent and anger towards it. Other people feel a sense of hopelessness towards it. But in essence, it's negativity, and that breeds unhappiness.
Is there a threat of this erupting in South Africa at some point, according to the work that you guys do?
Is there a threat of?
Of this erupting into wider issues of violence in South Africa?
Well, we hope not. We sincerely hope not. The UN has launched last year what is known as the Together campaign, and one of the aims of the campaign is to promote social cohesion and dialogue between people from different nationalities, and to promote you know, understanding of the differences between the cultures and so on. But I think beyond that as well, you know, I think it's time, or there's a contribution that every person can play. I think rather than spreading hate and discontent and propagating the differences that exist between the different cultures, I think we need to sit down and actually say, can we not embrace our differences and look at the positives that people can play, the skills that other people from other countries can bring into the country as well, and assist us in making this country a better place.
You mentioned unemployment a little bit earlier, and I want to take it to the African continent to wrap up our discussion. 60% of young people, or 60% of the human beings on the continent are young people, or termed youth. And I suppose the only way to make them happy going forward would be to create the kind of job opportunities that we so sorely lack at the moment, isn't it?
Absolutely. Unemployment is a huge issue on the African continent, especially for the youth. I think in South Africa, we can look at the Fees Must Fall campaign as one. We can look at some of the other initiatives that are on the ground in terms of the CEO Sleep Out and so on, aiming to take in interns into their various companies. I think that there are quite a lot. There's a high number of unemployed youth across the continent as well. But more than that, I think, you know, it also relates to issues of governance. I think what the report has highlighted is that you still have some aspects of the third liberation, which is asking Africans to get rid of bad governance and actually, you know, further their own development and prosperity. And we also have the big man syndrome, which is talking about the gap between the men that are in power, who tend to be over 70, and the youth that are sort of under 30, and the age gap that leads to the differences and the misunderstanding between what the youth actually need. So I think it all relates to issues of governance across the continent as well. And we've seen from the Arab Spring and the Arab uprisings of 2011, we've seen how youth are taking to the streets to actually protest for what they see as a better future for themselves. So I think that, you know, in terms of unemployment, poverty, it comes back to income. It comes back to what the UN is promoting, and that is the Sustainable Development Goals, which the 192 member states adopted in 2015, which talks about, you know, eradicating poverty, zero hunger, access to good health and sanitation, water, and quality education. And these are struggles of the youth. And of course, you're talking about reducing inequalities, focusing on women especially. You know, women youth need to have equal opportunities in the workplace, and also not be sidelined when it comes to also income issues. We see reports coming out saying that women are earning far less than men and so on. That contributes to the unhappiness level. That contributes to the role that women who are in the youth sector can play as well.
Zeenat, thank you very much for that information. That's Communications Officer at the United Nations Information Centre, Zeenat Abdool. She's talking about, well, the Happiness Report 2017. It says Africans are unhappy, and we